Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name's Emily Loeb, and I'm the director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, which is a program of the Tree of Life. If you are new to us, welcome. The Holocaust Center's mission is to connect the horrors of the Holocaust and antisemitism with injustices of today, and we strive to empower individuals to build a more civil and humane society. We organize a host of school-based and community-facing programs and events. And one of the most effective ways we help people understand the complex topics of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism is connecting them to real people. And tonight's program is a perfect example of that approach. On your way in, you may have noticed that we have some programs lined up in the next few months. On March 19th, we're co-hosting a program with the Center of Life at the Hazelwood Brewhouse, where Avie Dresdner, who's the son of civil rights activist Rabbi Cy Dresdner, will have a discussion with Reverend Tim Smith, where they will trace the history of the African-American and Jewish relationship during the civil rights movement and explore ways to collaboratively address racism and anti-Semitism today. Also, please mark your calendars for our annual Yom HaShoah commemoration, which will be held on Monday, April 13th at 7 p.m. at Rodef Shalom. And we have a few other programs planned between and around those events, so please check our events page on our website. As always, I want to thank the Holocaust Center team, Christina Sahovi, Julia Gattano, Noah Schoen, and Dan Singleton for helping make all of our programming possible, the team at the Tree of Life, the Light Education Initiative, and Chatham University. I also want to thank the Sylvia and Martin Snow Charitable Family Fund, who help support our work to continue to share personal stories about the Holocaust with the community. And now for tonight's program. About a year ago, we received an email from Jerry Guttman, who explained that he was a Holocaust survivor and wanted to learn more about the work that we do. As you can imagine, this was an exciting moment for us. It's not every day that we learn about a new survivor in Pittsburgh. And so Jerry started coming to our programs and talking about wanting to share his unique story. Rather than giving a formal lecture tonight, we're going to explore his life through conversation, letting his experience guide us through the choices, uncertainties, and moments of chance that help shape his survival. And then we'll open it up for questions from you. So now I'm going to invite up my friend, Lee Goldman-Keuchel, who's going to introduce you to Jerry.
Good evening. I'm going to say a few words about Jerry before I read his bio. Jerry and I met last summer through Emily Loeb. We've spent a lot of time getting to know each other, and I just want to tell you about a few things I learned about Jerry. Jerry is polite, cordial, and very funny. He loves to learn new things, and he can talk with anyone about anything. One of his qualities I like best is his ability to reciprocate a conversation. I'm grateful to call Jerry my friend, and I'm happy that he has become a member of the Holocaust Center community. It is wonderful that he is sharing his story with all of us. So, Jerry Guttman was born in Dresden, Germany in 1932. With his parents' forethought, he managed to escape Hitler's racial laws as well as Mussolini's subsequent anti-Semitism. From Italy, the family evacuated to Tangier, Morocco, where Jerry spent his formative years, including his bar mitzvah. He later graduated high school in Milan, Italy, where the family moved after World War II. At the age of 21, with the sponsorship of a prominent American diplomat whom Jerry met in Milan, he was able to emigrate to the United States. Shortly after his arrival, he was drafted into the Army and served during the Korean War. He was later accepted to attend the University of Pennsylvania on the GI Bill. Jerry built a career and family in Philadelphia, where he lived for many years with his late wife, Avie, before moving to California to be closer to their children. After many years on the West Coast, Jerry moved back to Pennsylvania in 2021.
So, Jerry, welcome.
Thank you.
You were born in Dresden in 1932 just before Hitler came to power. Could you give us a glimpse into what life was like for your family as Jews living in Germany during that time? And what did they do for a living?
Well, I can't exactly say that I remember that period, but my research shows that I was born in 1932, in May 1932, approximately 1 year before Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. And so my parents knew that something was cooking, and everybody in Germany at the time knew that Hitler was going to come to power, and he had run on the Nazi platform. And the Nazi platform was self-explanatory for those who heard about it or looked at it. And what was going to happen was pretty evident. But it was rather interesting that although he came to power in 1933 on that platform, he actually didn't do anything specific until the famous Nuremberg laws that were passed in 1935. And those laws made it very clear that if you're a Jew, you're going to be in trouble. The fact that my parents were self-conscious about it was the fact that they decided to name me when I was born Hans Siegfried. You know, couldn't be any more Aryan than that. They wanted to make sure that in case I was picked up, they wouldn't know him as Jacob or David. And so after 1935 laws, which I just mentioned, in 1936, early 36, my parents had the presence of moving from Germany, and they ended up by picking Italy. Why? Mussolini in Italy had been in power since the mid-20s, and the Jews were doing very nicely in Italy. They were part of the military, they were part of the government, they were in academia, and there was no antisemitism to speak of until Mussolini decided to befriend Hitler. And in 1938, Mussolini came up with the Italian racial laws, which were very similar to the Nazi platform. And so at that time, my father and my parents, that is, decided to get out. Unfortunately, it wasn't that easy because no country, including the United States, would let you in without a formal visa, which obviously was very difficult to obtain, except for two places. One was Tangier in northern Morocco, on the African coast, right below Spain. It was actually only 9 miles between the African coast and the European coast, and Shanghai in China. I presume, and the reason for which I'm saying I presume is because I have many regrets of not having asked my parents a bunch of questions, which I should have. He looked at a map and said, from Milan to Tangier is easier than from Milan to Shanghai. And we ended up in Tangier. Professionally, my parents were furriers. That is to say, on my mother's side in Berlin, they were furriers for several generations. And when my father met my mother in Berlin, he became a furrier as well. And so it changed after we moved to Tangier, but I want to stay on your question there.
That's okay. It's super interesting. So you spent some time in Italy as a little boy. What was that like when you were in Italy the first time?
Very nice. Very, how should I say? I was 4 or 5, something like that. And I remember, I saw pictures more than I should remember. But being on the beaches, and even though we lived in Milan, we had a very nice life, I would say. My father had a fur store, and even though I was very young, I was in charge of the keys to the warehouse where the furs were stored.
So Tangiers was an unusual refuge and was one of, the few places that your family ended up in. I realize you maybe didn't know from your father, but do you know how they acquired the visa, how they ended up there?
No, because a visa was not required.
How they, do they just get on a boat?
Correct. Correct. I mean, Tangiers was an open international city. By that, I mean that the government consisted of a meeting of various, there weren't embassies, there were consulates. So each country had a consulate in Tangiers, and they ran the city. So much so that if you wanted to send a letter out, you could go to the Spanish post office, the French post office, the German post office, the English post office, and probably a bunch of other post offices. And they had local Tangiers stamps. And it turned out, upon further research on my part, that part of the reason for which that existed is because the countries didn't trust each other in terms of communication coming through Tangiers. And Tangiers was an international open city where everything was going on, including spying all over the place. And, for those of you who have seen Casablanca, it gives you a little bit of that atmosphere of that international aspect of the city. And it remained international, even though during the Second World War, Spain, who was neutral at the time, did not participate in the war, managed to send troops into Tangiers. And so even though Tangiers was occupied by Spanish troops, the international aspect of it never changed. So there was a sort of an interesting twist to history at that particular point.
Can you explain a little bit about the relationship with the Vichy government?
Well, yes, because Morocco was a French protectorate, except for the Tangiers, which I described. And so when France lost to Germany, the Vichy government, which was pro-German, occupied that part of Morocco. And so southern Morocco, except for Tangiers, was actually, for all intents and purposes, occupied by Vichy France.
Do you have memories of arriving in Morocco and realizing that you were going to be staying there and living there?
No, I think I was too young. I was like 7 or 8 or something like that. But I remember enjoying the environment. I remember enjoying the town, particularly because life was very interesting and cosmopolitan. You spoke different languages. I went to a French lycée during the day. I spoke German at home with my parents, and in the streets, everybody spoke Spanish. And so it was very normal to switch from one to the other. I remember that instead of getting piano lessons, I had fencing lessons. Don't ask me why, but I remember that part of it.
So, as you once said to me, selling furs in Morocco is not a great business plan. So can you talk some about how your father had to reinvent himself?
Yes, I mean, as you pointed out, it would have been a tough act to sell to the Arabs. So my father invested in a cafe that, by the way, if you want to look it up, exists today in Tangiers, called Café Tingis. Tingis is a Latin translation for Tangier. So he opened this cafe in the part of town called Petit Soko versus Grand Soko, and ran it, very nicely. I don't know if I could go sidewise for a moment there. The interesting part about the cafe was that he didn't know anything about the business. And so he hired you would call it a chef, an English guy, who worked perfectly fine. Everything was fine. And one day the guy just disappeared, didn't come to work. We never found out what happened to the guy. But after the war, we found out that he actually was a British spy who worked, not for my father, but he worked for my father, not as a spy. And so we were able to trace him back to Palestine, where he lived at the time. And the reason for which this is important is because after I came to the United States and after I married and after I had children, I wanted to bring my parents over from Europe, because when I was 21 by myself when I came to the United States. So my sister and my mother made it perfectly fine. My father was not allowed to come into the United States. And it turned out, after researching it, that the reason was that according to the American government, I don't know, the CIA at the time, he was a collaborator. And the reason for which he was a collaborator was in Tangiers, at the Café Tingis, the American ambassador might sit at one table and the German ambassador would sit at another table, which in Tangiers was perfectly fine. That's why I referenced to Casablanca just as a point of reference. And so it's important that the reason for I mentioned that is because we eventually found the chef spy who lived in Palestine, Israel eventually, and he was able to vouch for my father and then let my father into the United States.
So, after the war, many families were not able to leave Europe in time, during the war. Would you talk a little bit about what happened to your family members, some of your aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, my grandmother on my father's side visited us from Poland, and my father obviously wanted that she would stay, that she shouldn't go back, but she insisted. And after she was gone, we corresponded with her for a while. And one day, an envelope came back, a returned mail, with a swastika on it, and said, "No such person." So we knew that something had happened to her. On my father's side, he had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Both brothers survived. One, in fact, came to the United States after the war. And the 2 sisters passed away or died during the war. On my mother's side, on the other hand, the only person that I know that passed away was a cousin who moved to what was at the time Palestine, 1948, and joined the Jewish brigade and was killed during that battle.
So after the war, your family returned to Italy as opposed to staying in Morocco. What do you think drew them back to Europe, and what had changed by then?
Well, the idea of staying in Tangiers forever, I don't think crossed anybody's mind. It was very comfortable. It was nice living. you could, it was limited to the extent that the experience of living there while the war was going on across the street, if you will, was a unique experience and wouldn't exactly be an incentive to stay there forever. Number one. Number two, I don't think that my father thought that the cafe business was the permanent profession. And so Italy made it easy to move back if you could prove that you had lived there before. And so he decided, of all the countries, that there was a country that he was most comfortable with. And that's exactly what we did.
And one thing that I remember you telling me is that when you were in Tangier, to go back, you became a bar mitzvah in Morocco, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Well, there was no formal synagogue in Tangier, although there were many Jews, many of them local, but most of them refugees of one type or another. But there was a Jewish center. The best way I can describe it is for those of you who know about Chabad as an organization. It was very similar. So it was Jewish, but not formally a synagogue. And so I remember being bar mitzvahed. I remember it also because I have a picture of it, which helped. And life over there was interesting in a sense that although I was 13, the cafe that I mentioned was next to a movie theater by the name of Rex, R-E-X, which exists today, but under the name of RIF. So at age 13, I would spend a lot of time in the projection room of this movie theater and changing the wheels on the projector, and so many movies out of that particular location.
So when your family went to Italy, you told me you used to ski in Cortina.
Yeah, in Italy, I remember vividly, every summer we used to go to San Pellegrino, which is a place where you can get the waters. And then in the wintertime, we used to go to Cortina d'Ampezzo, where I skied. They didn't, but I skied. And it was just a natural thing to do. It took about 3 or 4 hours to drive from Milan to Cortina up in the Dolomites, which is northern Italy.
So then, can you give us some insight into how you made it from Italy to America at age 21?
I'm trying to think of where to begin. I was going to school, high school, where I graduated from in Italy, and 2 languages, if I can call them that, were mandatory. One was Latin, and the other one was English. And so in order to practice my English, I would make a point of taking my bécane, which is my bicycle, and hang out around the airport because tourists would come by and ask for directions. And one particular day, this couple showed up and they asked me for directions, and I gave them the directions, and then they asked me to guide them in the city during their stay. And they stayed about maybe, let's say, no more than 2 weeks, but I became their official guide. At the end of those 2 weeks, the gentleman said, Giovanni, and I have to go into that. Giovanni, how would you like to come to the United States? It had never crossed my mind. I said, yeah, sure, why not? I mean, just very normal-wise. It turns out that approximately 9 months later, I got a call from the American consulate saying, please come in to fill out your papers your visa has been approved. I asked my father and my mother what I should do, and my father took a nice position. He said, look, you don't have to go. There's no reason for you to go, but try it out. If you like it, fine. If you don't like it, you can always come back. And so I said, okay, let's try it. It turns out, after the fact, for me to find out that the couple that I mentioned, that the guy was actually a congressman from Pennsylvania at the time, and he was able to handle the papers, and he actually became my sponsor. So in other words, he was responsible for me. And the interesting piece of that is that after I came to the United States, in Philadelphia, they invited me for supper at their apartment. And they said, if you need anything, let me know. I didn't need anything. And so I never spoke to them again. They never followed up to try to find out if I was okay. I presume that it had to do with the fact that they were very thankful that they didn't have to be responsible for me for whatever reason, even though I found it odd. But it was an interesting aspect of that particular experience.
So now I feel like we need to back up a little bit and explain Giovanni.
Okay, so remember when I started to say that I was named Hans Siegfried. Hans stayed with me through Germany, through the first Italian experience, including Tangier's. When we moved to Italy the second time, the authorities at the entry level point would Italianize names, just normal process. Jacob become Giacomo, or that's so. Hans is really John, and John is Giovanni. So I became Giovanni Guttman while in Italy. I was drafted as Giovanni Guttman. I was in the military as Giovanni Guttman, which brings up an interesting question, which is, where does Jerry come from? It turns out that in the Army, there was a law, maybe still exists, that if you serve in the military for a certain amount of time, say 2 years or something like that, you can become a citizen automatically. So my colonel in charge called me in. Giovanni, sit down. He says, you're now an official citizen of the United States. Yes, sir, thank you. Anything else I can do for you? Say, yes, sir, please. I want to change my name from Giovanni to Jerry. He turned the papers over, scribbled something on it. You got it. That's good. Because I didn't think that the Giovanni and the Guttman went well together.
So when you reflect on your life, from Germany to Italy to Morocco to the United States, what do you think these experiences ultimately gave you?
Well, that's a very deep question. But I think that it taught me maybe that you should take your life for granted, that you should look for opportunities, that you should take advantage of the opportunity that you have, and that you shouldn't be naive in the sense that, do I really have to do that? I mean, imagine, when I decided to come to the United States, did I have to do that? There was no compelling reason per se. So that's one aspect of it. When my parents left Germany the first time around, they didn't wait around as some people did, those who thought that Hitler could be controlled, which was historically the explanation today about how come he got elected to begin with. Sorry, he never got elected, he got appointed. And the same thing is true with leaving Italy. In other words, be alert, take advantage of situations. Don't take life as it is for granted, and make sure that you know what you're doing. And in general, allow a certain part of your life, without exaggerating, thinking about the ramifications of where you are, what you do, and how you go about it.
So before we open it up for Q&A, we have some photos from your life. Craig, can you put those on? I think they're going to come up. And you're going to explain what these are. So we'll start with this one.
Okay, this one is in Milan. I think I was 4 or 5. That's my father. Yeah, that's exactly right. 1938.
So is this in Italy?
Yeah, in Milan, Italy.
Do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah, next. That's when I was bar mitzvahed in Tangier, even though that's not what I wore.
This photo is pretty special.
Yeah, this is Tangier, the cafe, as you can see. There is the plaque there. And I want to stress the fact that if you go online, this place exists today. Next.
Oh, wait.
Sorry.
Go back for a second. So can you explain, so when we're looking, you can see this sort of diversity of clientele. And so this would have been taken like when your dad owned the restaurant?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Okay, that is Genoa, Italy, boarding the Independence ship to the United States, and I'm there in the middle of the picture. And the ship next to it is the Andrea Doria that sank 2 years after that. You probably heard about that sinking, but it was just a coincidence. Next. Yeah, I don't know who that is. Yeah, that's
Giovanni.
Private Giovanni Guttman.
Okay, I think that's all.
That's it? Okay.
So we'd be happy to open it up for questions. We figured that you guys probably have a lot of questions about Italy, Germany, Tangiers, and if not, we can keep talking. But if you have a question, we have some microphones that we can run, so just raise your hand. There's Christina, we have microphones that'll be on either side.
Thank you very much for talking to us. I'm wondering, we've heard quite a bit more about Shanghai as a place for Jewish people to escape to, but not much about Tangiers. Do you know why that is? Was it a smaller grouping of refugees?
No, I think that it had to do with the status of Tangier as an open city, an international city, where, you could move freely. You couldn't do that in Shanghai. In fact, shortly after people moved to Shanghai, they created the ghetto, even within the city. So they were free of the war, but they were not free in the true sense of the word. And Tangiers gave one that opportunity.
Well, why did not go there?
She wanted to know why more Jews did not go to Morocco if it was such a...
They did. There's several. I mean, the refugee, what I call refugee population of Tangiers at the time was relatively large given the size of the town. So people who wanted to leave Europe one way or the other had those two choices. Some people, for one reason or another, personal usually, may have had more of a tendency to go, to China. But Tangier seems easier to go to, both geographically and practically.
It's my understanding that the King of Morocco has been very supportive of the Jewish population. I don't know how long that has been the case, but you mentioned that there was no synagogue specifically there. What kind of Jewish community was able to be created? And today, is there any type of synagogue and Jewish community?
I can't answer the synagogue today part because I haven't asked the question. But the population, Jewish population there, consisted of a basics Jewish, Sephardic, I wouldn't say Arab, but local population who had been there for a long time, for generations, for all we know. And then the so-called refugees, which were Europeans who had moved there because of the Second World War and because they had to get out of wherever it is that they came from. So they were Jewish, but they were from all over the place in terms of nationality. And so the fact that it was an open city, and the king had more to do with the rest of Morocco rather than Tangiers, because Tangiers had been declared international by the equivalent of, the United Nations, which didn't exist at the time, but the equivalent of many European countries that wanted to have an opportunity to have a city in a town that where anybody could come in and anybody can live without the danger of being repressed one way or the other.
At what age did you begin to understand the horrors that your family escaped, and did they actually talk about it?
She asked, at what age did you really start to learn about what your family had experienced in the Holocaust, and did your family talk about it?
I think I became self-aware after Tangiers. Once I returned to Italy the second time around, I was at the right age, and there was no particular interest at 13 or 14 to find out much about life, particularly since you were busy being a kid. But after we moved to Italy and I became more mature and people had started to ask questions, and in order to be able to respond to those questions, what I didn't know, I learned, I asked, and so I became more. But by the time I left Italy for the United States, I was pretty much up to date.
Did your parents talk about, like your dad, did he talk about his mom?
Except for that event that I mentioned, it didn't come up. In fact, as I think I mentioned earlier, in terms of regrets, one big regret that I have is somehow never having had the presence of sitting down with my father and asking a whole bunch of questions, some as basic as, when and how did you meet Mom? Can't be any more basic than that. I didn't ask. Why did you leave from Ukraine, Poland to Berlin? never found out. Since my family on my mother's side had lived in Berlin for generations, why was I born in Dresden? No idea. So there's a bunch of things of that type and that nature that I don't think my parents would just volunteer unless I asked the question.
And you had an uncle in Philadelphia that survived Auschwitz, right?
No, he was in the Polish army, and when Russia occupied Poland, he ended up in the Russian army, and he was able to come to the United States. So when I came to the United States, Philadelphia specifically, I was able to move in with him and live there for the better part of a year before I was drafted.
Hi, Jerry.
Yeah.
I'm a fellow 2G, and I've met you before. So I know, according to my friend sitting next to me, that her grandmother had to pay quite a bit of money to go to Shanghai. Did your parents, so I have more than one question. Did your parents have to pay a lot of money to get there, to Tangier?
Not at all. No, it was.
Wow.
No, and I think part of the reason was the nature of that city, the setup, because there was no country controlling the place. It was known as an international zone, open city, and so if somebody had wanted to collect money, who might that have been, because of the multitude of countries that ran the place?
And my second question, I believe you said that your father's sisters passed away or died during the war. Do you know if they were murdered by the Nazis, or did they just die of natural causes, or do you not know anything?
All we know there was that they just disappeared, in the sense that we never heard from them again, period. But
So most likely
we don't know
they
the
were murdered.
circumstances
Yeah.
there.
And my friend behind me has a question.
Was there someone else?
Go for it, Michelle.
You sure? Hi, I'm a 2G as well. What a wonderful presentation. I think my questions are short, and they're kind of related to your comment of that you didn't get a chance to ask your person, your father, and you are sitting right in front of me, and I'm looking forward to asking you some historical questions of yourself, if I may. I'm up to about 5 languages that you speak. Do I have the count? That's the least detailed one, but it's so impressive. The other one is I'd like to know a little bit more about what you did in the USA, and your relaying this story to your family and how that felt and their reaction to it and what ages. It's just sort of we're all get the story at different times. And I would really like to hear your experience, and also how many languages do you speak? Final count.
Let me try to answer some of the questions that I remember you asking.
I apologize. I will rephrase if I
The
need
language part is easy. I speak fluently French, German, Italian, Spanish, and my latest acquisition, which is English. What was another one?
Don't forget Latin, so it's at least 6.
My family today accepts my idiosyncrasies, and we don't go into. They've heard this before in snippets, not formally, and I like to believe that they accepted this, so that it doesn't come up very often.
You asked for a rephrase. When did you start telling them? But also, did you tell your story in California, or have you just started?
No, this is my first. This is my first experience, if I can call it that.
Thank you for sharing. It's been amazing. Yeah. Okay. I need my friends to remind me of a question I asked. What did you do in the U.S., please? Professionally.
After going to school at Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, I was able to form a consulting firm that helped publishing companies become more effective and getting more readers, getting more subscribers. And I did that for the last 50 years.
Jerry is very tech savvy. If he sends read receipt emails, it's like pretty impressive. Keeps me on my toes.
Jerry, right here. Hi. What was the name of the congressman that sponsored you? And was he Jewish or?
No. The name was, his last name was Martin. His last name was Martin. That's all I know. He was definitely not Jewish. It was just purely circumstantial that I would meet him outside of the airport, and that he had this notion of helping me out to come to the United States. It was really more of a lark than anything else. It wasn't planned, let me put it that way.
Was your building?
Do you need the microphone?
Hi, Dad. I was wondering if you could just talk briefly about when your father did come to the United States and what business became his business in the U.S. and how that integrated with your young family.
Yeah, when my father came, my father and mother came to the United States. I'm trying to remember if I described them being able to come.
You described the spy, but you did not talk about his business.
Okay. Apparently, from the cafe experience, he decided to invest in a resort place in Highland Lake, New York, and he ran what I would consider sort of an Airbnb with a restaurant, and I think my son and the rest of some members of the family, certainly my wife, worked there for a while and spent the summers there, if that's what you're referring to.
That it brought other people that had come to the U.S. in similar circumstances, right?
Yes. It was sort of a destination, if you will, for other people who had similar background, similar circumstances. So it was not a typical American-born clientele.
Was this in the Catskills?
Yes.
That's where.
Yep.
Is there anything else that? Okay.
This is all.
Yeah.
Sir, do you recall any episodes of personal anti-Semitism you experienced, or your parents experienced, or were they smart enough to keep ahead of the whole situation?
Thank you.
Do you mean in Germany and Italy?
All of it.
So did you?
Yeah, except for the sir part. Not really. I mean, there probably was your typical then sort of anti-Semitism that one found in schools where you were a minority, Jew boy, that kind of stuff. That occurred primarily in Italy. But other than that, I have no ill recollection of that aspect of it. Maybe I was not sensitive to it. Maybe I didn't pick it up, but I didn't suffer from it.
Yeah. Hi, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this. Why or how did your family, do you think, how were they able to make that call to leave when they did and actually act on it when so many stayed?
Well, that's I'm asked that very often, and yet it was terribly easy in a sense that if you look at Germany during that period, Hitler came to power based on Nazi propaganda, Nazi laws that he had supported since the late 20s. And so anybody in his right mind at the time would have seen and known that this was going to happen. The difference is that my parents had the presence of doing something about it, which I was alluding to earlier about, what you learn from your experience, is instead of believing what some of the German people thought, even at the highest level, that it could be controlled, that the Nazi platform was an exaggeration, that he couldn't really implement some of the stuff that is in there. That was a naive attitude, and my parents were part of the group, or part of the people who said, wait a minute, I don't want to find out. So that's basically how they reacted and took advantage of it. And they did exactly the same thing in Italy. When Mussolini decided to come up with Italian racial laws in 1938, you could have also believed, well, he has been around for the last 15 years and he hasn't done anything about it. This is just propaganda. Get the hell out of there. So I hope that answers that.
One thing to think about, which I think some people, like when you get down into the specifics, like 2/3 of German Jews survived the war because the first part of the Nazi agenda was making life really uncomfortable in Germany before they started actually the mass murder. And so similar to what Jerry's saying, for example, my grandparents left in 1938. I'm looking at Cindy, her parents and grandparents left at 1938. The people, the sort of 33% that stayed, for a lot of them either couldn't get out, they didn't have the resources to, or they were like my great-grandparents who were military veterans and business owners, and they were like, there's no way this is going to hold. We'll just put our heads down. We've got resources. We'll stick it out. And then when they realized how bad it was, they couldn't get out. But Germany's situation is really different than Poland, where 80%, almost the entire Jewish population was decimated. So each country was affected differently depending upon when Hitler and the Nazis invaded it and what was going on in the community. I don't know if that helps a little bit.
Yeah, also a quick comment about what happened in Germany versus what happened in Italy. The laws were very similar, but in Italy they were not enforced because the population wasn't for it. So even though the laws existed, they were very loosely implemented by the government.
Hi. So you mentioned that on your father's side that the family was from Ukraine and maybe part of Ukraine that was part of Poland at some point also. So you were talking about the languages you spoke. I'm wondering if Yiddish was one of those. And then I have a totally separate question, which is, did you watch the Winter Olympics that just concluded, and did that bring back memories for you?
Yeah, the first question is, what was the question?
Did you speak Yiddish?
Yeah. I understood Yiddish because of its similarity to German, but I do not speak it. But if somebody was talking to me in Yiddish, the chances are that I would understand maybe 60% of it. And I would respond in German or not respond at all. The other question,
Did you watch the Olympics?
I watched the Olympics partially, but I thoroughly enjoyed seeing some parts of Milan, which rang a bell, places that I'd seen and places that I'd been in, to the extent that that was possible. Yes.
Mr. Guttman, if I could just attempt maybe to fill in some gaps. I'm not a historian by any sense, but having done a significant amount of reading and research, one question is to credit your parents for having the foresight to leave Germany. And I understand some in the audience are wondering why more of the Jewish population didn't leave. And my understanding, there's two reasons for that. Number one, the Nazis consistently deceived the Jewish population. And so, again, credit to your parents for leaving when they did. And then as Hitler took a stronger reign in Germany, they began requesting, in essence, requiring Jewish population to leave Germany with nothing. And so there's kind of a combination of the continual deception while internally they were ramping up the anti-Semitism, and then the need as time went on towards the perhaps the late 30s, early 40s, the Jewish population wasn't going to leave Germany, in any way, shape, or matter. But the Nazis were going to request a significant payment. So you left, if you were lucky enough to leave Germany, you were going to leave with absolutely nothing other than the clothes on your back.
Yeah, there is a slight difference, progression, if you will, between the Nazi platform on which politics were running at the time, late 20s, early 30s. After Hitler was appointed chancellor, it was only mid-1933, and the Nazi platform hadn't changed. But in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were very clear and very explicit and included some of the stuff that you just mentioned about you can't own a business, you can't intermarry, including get the hell out if you could afford it. So when my parents left, it was shortly after those laws in early 1936. So by then it became pretty blatant that you better get out. Whether or not his monies were confiscated or not, I don't know that. I can't answer that. Does that answer your question?
Hi, Jerry. I have two topics, so I'll start with my first one. You've lived in so many different countries, and you've spoke so many different languages. It's really impressive, but I'm really wondering about the cultural difference between living so many different places at different points in your life. What that's been like, what it's been like staying in America for so long as well, and if you found community or reached out to anyone from places you used to be. What's it just been like experiencing that many different cultures?
Do I have any regrets for moving to the United States?
That too.
Well, I think it formed my outlook in terms of accepting a multitude of ideas, religions, languages, realizing that everybody's different. And I think that helps in your relationships with others, so that you don't become, set in a particular way of thinking, and then everybody else has to live up to your standard. Wait a minute, there are other ways of thinking about it. In terms of countries, no, I don't think that. Many of among the countries that I've lived in, I think one big difference, obviously, is my age and my life. I feel differently about the United States in the sense that I was married here and I had children, etc., versus how did I feel in Tangier when I was bar mitzvah. So it's the comparison that can't really be made. But in general, I would say that it opens up my eyes in a shape or form that I would otherwise not have experienced if I had just stayed in a single place.
Hi, Jerry. I'd like to know when your family was living in Tangiers, were you aware of what was going on to the Jews in Europe?
Was I aware of the war? Definitely. Yes. I mean,
So
consider that I was 13, 14. So
well, I didn't mean you. I mean, like, so the news came through. You knew some of what was going on in your pit.
I mean, radio, we didn't have TV, but the radio was on all the time, and the newspapers were there all the time. So it was practically impossible to live there without knowing what was going on, except we didn't suffer from it, but we were aware of it.
A word about the future. So few Holocaust survivors today, and this was touched on by a forward newsletter that was put out last week about the future of conversations like we're having here today. We were lucky to have you here because there's so few around. Anyhow, I noted down that they suggested that an effort, actually they're doing it, a nationwide effort that enables students to have conversations with virtual versions of Holocaust survivors like yourself. You would do your talk to a camera telling this whole story, but AI will tell the story conversation style in the future. So you would actually be sitting down 100 years from now talking with a student telling exactly what we were hearing here today.
Well, assuming that YouTube still exists 100 years from now, my understanding is that this presentation will be available on YouTube.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Right. The conversation around AI and conversations with Holocaust survivors and almost like fabricating answers is a philosophical debate, an ethical debate that's happening in Holocaust studies. And there is, like USC Shoah many years ago recorded testimony with many survivors, like days and days worth of questions that are now available in this eyewitness where they have like a hologram of a survivor and you can ask a question and it cycles through this computer program that probably Jerry understands how it works better than I do, and it pulls up answers. But what happens with that program is that sometimes someone will ask a question and there's not an answer for that, and the hologram will say, I don't understand your question. I think what you're saying and what's getting tricky is that there's now the ability that they could just make up an answer. And that is a whole other ethical question that's going on in a debate. And personally, like, I don't think there's enough distortion of history. I think it's a really scary road to go down when you start then making up answers.
Oh, this one.
And we'll do maybe, one more?
Maybe two more questions. One or two. Jerry, are you okay with that? Okay. Okay.
I have a question. We have been staring at that wonderful photo that's posted. You look like you own the world at that point. The question is coming from my Viennese father, who came to America, finished the Bronx High School of Science, and then enlisted. He had great trouble adjusting to his service because of cultural differences, that he wasn't yet fully in America and then suddenly doing this. Can you speak a little bit about your U.S. Army experience? I gave you background why I'm asking, but I'm very curious how you found it. I haven't been able to talk to too many people about that.
Except for the Giovanni part, private Giovanni Guttman, I didn't have any, that I know of, any adjustment problems. No, in fact, in retrospect, short of not being in battle, I have a good experience from my military service.
Okay, I think we'll take just one more question over there. DNBC, Carrie.
Hi, Jerry. I very much enjoyed this conversation. I also had a father who left Germany in 1935. His mother also had the idea that it was not going to be very good for Jewish people, and they were lucky enough to have a relative here in the United States who sponsored them. My question is that, or my comment first is, my family was not very religious in Germany. They were very assimilated, and they even had a Christmas tree in their house during the holidays, which they said was for the people who worked in their house. But that was the truth of it. And I was just wondering if your family had been religious, or if that was very pervasive, that the Jews there were pretty assimilated, because my family definitely felt like they were German first and Jewish second.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to categorize first or second, but I would say that religiously wise, we were basically the equivalent of Reformed Jews. Even back then, that's about all I can remember.
Yeah, that's how my family
in
was,
terms of
too.
that period of life.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. And this is Jerry's first public presentation of his life, and I really appreciate him sharing it with us. Easy.